The morning sun painted Eldorado Canyon, Nevada in shades of amber and rust, when Jack Vernon first saw the letter that would change everything. Though he could not yet know that the woman who wrote it would become the reason his heart beat steady and true through 6 months of waiting that would have broken lesser men. Jack stood on the wooden platform of the train station, the telegram crisp between his calloused fingers. His brother Thomas had been killed in a mining accident 3 months prior in California, leaving behind a young widow named Grace Reynolds who had nowhere to go and no family to speak of. Thomas had written about her constantly in his letters, how they had met at a church social in Sacramento, how her laugh reminded him of music, how her kindness made him want to be a better man. Now Thomas was gone, and Grace was alone in a world that did not look kindly upon women without protection or prospects. Jack had written back immediately, offering Grace a place to stay at his ranch outside Eldorado Canyon. It was not charity, he had assured her. The ranch needed a woman's touch, and he could use help with the books and the household matters. More than that, it was what Thomas would have wanted. Family took care of family, even family Jack had never met. Grace's response had come swiftly. She would arrive on the afternoon train on March 15th, 1873. She thanked him for his generosity and promised she would earn her keep. Her handwriting was neat and careful, the words of a woman educated beyond what was common for the time. March 15th dawned clear and bright. Jack rode into town early, his best shirt pressed, his dark hair combed back with water from the pump. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. The ranch hands had teased him that morning about cleaning up so fine for a sister-in-law he had never met. But Jack paid them no mind. A woman deserved to be greeted with respect, especially one who had lost as much as Grace had. The train was due at 2 o'clock. Jack waited on the platform, hat in hand, watching the eastern horizon for the plume of smoke that would announce the train's arrival. 2 o'clock came and went. The station master, a weathered man named Bill Cooper, checked his pocket watch and frowned. "Running late," Bill said. "Sometimes they get delayed in the mountains." 3 o'clock passed. Then 4. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Finally, at 5:30, the train chugged into the station, belching steam and cinders. Jack straightened, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that surprised him. He scanned the passengers as they disembarked. A cattle rancher he recognized, a family with 3 small children, an old woman in black, no young widow. Jack approached the conductor, described Grace as best he could from Thomas's letters. The conductor shook his head. "No woman matching that description on this train, friend. Sorry." Jack stood on the platform long after the train had departed, watching the tracks stretch away into the distance. Something had delayed her. Perhaps she had missed the train. Perhaps she had taken ill. He would return tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and the day after, and the day after that. Jack rode into Eldorado Canyon every afternoon, timing his arrival for when the eastbound train pulled into the station. Bill Cooper began to recognize him, offering sympathetic nods that Jack did not want. The ranch hands stopped teasing. Even they could see that something had taken hold of their boss, some determination that went beyond simple family obligation. A week became 2 weeks. Jack wrote letters to Sacramento, to the address Grace had provided, but received no response. The letters came back marked undeliverable. She had already left, the postmaster explained. No forwarding address. 2 weeks became a month. The cottonwoods along the creek began to bud. Jack still rode to the station every day. He told himself he was being foolish. Grace had clearly changed her mind, decided to make her own way rather than accept charity from a stranger. He could not blame her. It had been presumptuous to assume she would want to come to Nevada, to a place she had never seen, to live with a man she did not know. But something kept him returning to that platform. Some voice in his gut that said, "Wait. She is coming. Be patient." The ranch demanded his attention, but Jack managed the work around his daily trips to town. He woke before dawn to check the cattle and mend fences. He worked through lunch, his hands blistered and aching. Then he would wash up, saddle his horse, and ride the 5 miles to Eldorado Canyon, arriving just as the train whistle echoed through the valley. His ranch hands thought he was losing his mind. His neighbor, a widow named Catherine Morris, who had been making eyes at him for the better part of a year, told him he was wasting his time on a woman who clearly was not coming. Jack listened to them all and returned to the station the next day regardless. Spring deepened into early summer. The desert bloomed with wildflowers, purple and yellow and red against the brown earth. Jack kept waiting. He brought a book now, sitting on the bench near the platform, pretending to read while his eyes stayed fixed on the eastern horizon. Bill Cooper stopped asking questions. The other regular travelers began to nod to him in greeting, accepting his presence as a fixture of the station. 2 months became 3. The heat intensified. Jack bought a canteen to carry with him, filling it each morning from the well. He knew every plank of that platform, every nail and knot in the wood. He knew the exact sound the train made as it rounded the eastern bend. He knew the way the light hit the mountains at different times of the afternoon, painting them in shades of purple and gold. People asked him why he kept coming. Jack found it hard to explain, even to himself. It was more than obligation now. Thomas had loved Grace enough to marry her, to build a life with her. That had to mean something. And perhaps, in some part of himself he barely acknowledged, Jack felt connected to this woman he had never met. She had made his brother happy in a way nothing else had. She had written him letters full of grace and intelligence and quiet strength. She had lost everything and was still brave enough to accept help from a stranger and start over in a new place. If she was brave enough for that, Jack could be brave enough to wait. 3 months became 4. The summer solstice passed. The cattle grew fat on the grasslands Jack owned in the higher elevations. He hired an additional hand to help with the work his absence created. The man's wages cut into profits, but Jack could not bring himself to stop going to the station. The townsfolk of Eldorado Canyon had their theories. Some said Jack was sweet on a girl who had rejected him. Others whispered that he was touched in the head, driven mad by too much sun and solitude. Catherine Morris told anyone who would listen that Jack Vernon was a fool, throwing away his life for a ghost. But there were others who saw something different in Jack's daily vigil. Bill Cooper, the station master, told his wife that Jack Vernon was the most honorable man he had ever met, keeping faith when anyone else would have given up. The local minister mentioned Jack in his Sunday sermon, though he did not use his name, speaking of the virtue of constancy in an inconstant world. Jack paid no attention to any of it. He rose before dawn. He worked his ranch. He rode to the station. He waited for the train. He rode home. He slept. He did it all again the next day. 4 months became 5. August blazed across the desert, heat shimmering off the rails in waves. Jack developed a routine. He would arrive at the station at 1:30, giving himself time to water his horse at the trough behind the building. He would take his place on the bench, tipping his hat low to shade his eyes. When the train arrived, he would stand, scanning each passenger, hoping against hope to see a woman matching the description from Thomas's letters. Dark blonde hair, blue eyes. A small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident with a kitchen knife. The train would depart. Jack would stand on the platform for another few minutes, watching it disappear into the western distance. Then he would ride home, the setting sun at his back, and prepare to do it all again tomorrow. His hands developed new calluses from the reins. His horse, a patient bay gelding named Rusty, knew the route by heart. Some days Jack wondered if he was being the biggest fool in Nevada. Grace was not coming. Something had happened, something that prevented her from making the journey or simply made her change her mind. He was waiting for a woman who would never arrive. But then he would remember Thomas, laughing and free in a way Jack had never seen him before he met Grace. He would remember the care in Grace's handwriting, the way she had thanked him for his offer even as her grief was still fresh. He would remember that feeling in his gut that said, wait, just a little longer. 5 months became 6. September arrived, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of autumn in the high country. Jack had been waiting for 183 days. His ranch thrived despite his distraction, or perhaps because of it. The work gave him something to do with his hands, a way to burn off the restless energy that came with waiting. The town had stopped talking about him. His vigil had become simply part of the landscape, as permanent as the mountains and as reliable as the train schedule. Jack Vernon went to the station every day. That was just how things were. On the 184th day, a Tuesday in mid-September, Jack rode to the station as always. The air had a crispness to it that promised winter in another few months. The cottonwoods were beginning to turn gold along the creek. Jack dismounted, watered Rusty, and took his place on the bench. The train was late. Jack checked his pocket watch, the one that had belonged to his father. 2:15. 2:30. He was not worried. The trains ran late often enough. At 2:45, the whistle sounded in the distance. Jack stood, brushing dust from his trousers out of habit. The train rounded the bend, slowing as it approached the station. The brakes squealed. Steam hissed from the engine. The conductor stepped down, placing his little step for the passengers. 3 men disembarked, all minors by the look of them. An older couple Jack did not recognize. Then a woman in a dark blue traveling dress, moving carefully as though her body pained her. She carried a single carpet bag, worn and faded. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun beneath a plain bonnet. She was thin, too thin, her face pale and drawn. She stepped onto the platform and looked around with eyes so blue they reminded Jack of the sky after a storm. Her gaze found his and held. Something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than sight. Jack Vernon. Her voice was soft but steady. Grace Reynolds. It was not a question. She nodded, and Jack saw her throat work as she swallowed. I am so very sorry I am late. Jack crossed the platform in 3 long strides. He took the carpet bag from her hand, noting how light it was, how little she had brought with her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the way she held herself as though expecting to collapse at any moment. You are here now, Jack said. That is what matters. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, straightening her shoulders. I did not think you would still be waiting. I would not have blamed you for giving up. I gave you my word. Jack gestured toward Rusty. The ride to the ranch is not long, but I can rent a wagon if you would prefer not to ride. I can ride. Grace moved toward the horse, then swayed on her feet. Jack dropped the carpet bag and caught her elbow, steadying her. She was shaking, he realized, trembling like a leaf in a high wind. When did you last eat? I had some bread yesterday morning. Jack bit back a curse. He guided Grace to the bench, made her sit. Wait here. Do not move. He strode across the street to the general store, returning 5 minutes later with a wrapped sandwich and a canteen of fresh water. Grace took them with hands that shook, eating slowly at first, then faster as her hunger overcame her restraint. Jack stood watch, blocking her from the curious stares of passers-by. When she had finished, Grace wiped her mouth with a handkerchief pulled from her sleeve. "Thank you. I have money. I can repay you. You will do no such thing." Jack offered his hand, pulling her gently to her feet. "Can you ride now?" "Yes." Grace proved it by walking to Rusty without swaying. Jack mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her arms coming around his waist for balance. Jack tried not to notice the way her body felt pressed against his back, the soft warmth of her breath on his neck. The ride to the ranch took 40 minutes. Grace did not speak, but Jack felt her grip tighten whenever Rusty stumbled on the rough road. He kept the pace slow and steady, mindful of her weakened state. The ranch appeared as they crested the final ridge. The house was not large, but it was solidly built, with a wide porch and a well in the yard. The barn stood to the east, with a corral for the horses. Beyond that stretched miles of grazing land, dotted with cattle. "It is beautiful," Grace said softly. Jack helped her dismount, his hands on her waist longer than strictly necessary. She smelled like train smoke and sweat and something sweet underneath, maybe lavender. Her eyes met his, and Jack saw questions there and fear, and something else he could not name. "Let me show you inside." The house was clean, if spare. Jack had never been much for decoration. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace against one wall. A hallway led to 2 bedrooms and a small washroom. "You will take the larger bedroom," Jack said. "I moved my things to the smaller one last night. You did not have to do that. You deserve privacy and comfort after your journey." Jack set her carpet bag on the table. "There is a dress that belonged to my mother in the wardrobe. I thought you might want a change of clothes. The washroom is yours whenever you want it. I can heat water." Grace sank into one of the chairs at the table. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the clean floors, the wildflowers Jack had picked that morning and placed in a jar on the windowsill. "You waited," she said. "Every day, for 6 months, I did." "Why?" Jack pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Because I gave you my word. Because you were Thomas's wife and he loved you, because it was the right thing to do. Most men would have stopped after a week, maybe 2. I am not most men." A smile ghosted across Grace's face, the first Jack had seen. It transformed her features, giving him a glimpse of the woman she must have been before grief and hardship wore her down. "No," she said. "I do not suppose you are." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Jack did not quite understand. Finally, Grace spoke again. "I need to explain why I am so late. You deserve to know what delayed me. Only if you want to tell me. You do not owe me explanations." "I do, though." "You waited 6 months." Grace folded her hands on the table, and Jack saw the scar Thomas had mentioned, a pale line across her left palm. "When Thomas died, I had no money. He had been sending most of his wages back to his family, trying to help them keep their farm. We were living in a boarding house in Sacramento, barely making ends meet. When he was killed in the mine, the owner gave me $20 and told me I had 3 days to vacate our room." Jack felt anger kindle in his chest at the callousness of it, but he kept his face neutral, letting Grace continue. "I received your letter offering me a place here, and I was so grateful I wept, but I had no money for a train ticket. $20 was not nearly enough. So I took work as a seamstress, saving every penny. The boarding house owner allowed me to stay in a storage room in exchange for helping with the cooking and cleaning. You were in Sacramento this whole time, working to afford the ticket. For 3 months, yes. Then I had enough money, but when I went to buy the ticket, I discovered the prices had increased due to increased demand. I was short by $15. Grace's voice remained steady, but Jack could hear the strain beneath it. I took additional work as a laundress. It was hard labor, but it paid better. Another 2 months, and finally I had enough. You could have written to me. I would have sent money for the ticket. You had already done so much. You offered me a home, a fresh start. I could not ask for more. Grace met his eyes. I have my pride, Jack. It is about all I have left. I needed to get here on my own strength. What happened in the last month? Grace's hands tightened on each other. I bought the ticket and prepared to leave. The day before my train was to depart, I fell ill. A fever. I was out of my head for nearly 3 weeks. The doctor said I was lucky to survive. By the time I recovered enough to travel, I had missed my train and used all my remaining money on medical bills. How did you afford another ticket? I sold everything I owned except one change of clothes and Thomas's wedding ring. His watch, my mother's brooch, a cameo that had belonged to my grandmother. Everything. Grace's voice finally broke, just a little. I have nothing left but what is in that bag and $5 to my name. Jack reached across the table and covered her hands with his. Her skin was cool and rough from the laundry work. She startled at the touch but did not pull away. You have a home, Jack said. You have family, such as it is. You have me, for whatever that is worth. Grace's eyes filled with tears again, and this time she let them fall. Why are you so kind to me? You do not know me. I am nothing to you. You were everything to my brother. That makes you something to me. Jack squeezed her hands gently, then released them. You must be exhausted. Why do not you rest? We can talk more later. I should help with dinner. I should earn my keep. You can start earning your keep tomorrow. Today you rest. Jack stood and offered his hand. Grace took it, letting him pull her to her feet. He led her to the larger bedroom where he had made up the bed with fresh linens that morning. Grace looked at the bed the way a dying man might look at water. Sleep as long as you need, Jack said. I will wake you for supper if you do not emerge on your own. Jack, Grace stopped him as he turned to leave. Thank you for waiting. For believing I would come even when I am sure everyone told you I would not. I knew you would come, Jack said. I felt it. He left her then, closing the door softly behind him. He stood in the hallway for a moment, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. Grace Reynolds was here. After 6 months of waiting, wondering, hoping, she was finally here, and she was nothing like what he had expected. Thomas's letters had described a cheerful woman, quick to laugh, full of lightness and joy. The woman who had arrived today was worn thin by grief and hardship, fragile as glass. But beneath the exhaustion, Jack had seen strength. She had survived losing her husband, months of poverty and hard labor, illness that nearly killed her. She had sold everything she owned to honor her commitment to come here. That took courage beyond measure. Jack returned to the main room and began preparing supper. He was no great cook, but he could manage the basics. He put on a pot of beef stew, the meat tender from simmering all morning. He sliced bread from the loaf the neighbor woman had brought by yesterday, before he had told her firmly and finally that he was not interested in her attentions. He set the table for two. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack heard the ranch hands returning from the day's work, their voices loud and cheerful as they headed to the bunkhouse. He would introduce them to Grace tomorrow, when she was rested and ready to face more strangers. At 7 o'clock, Jack knocked softly on Grace's door. No response. He opened it a crack and saw her asleep on top of the quilt, still in her traveling dress, her hair coming loose from its pins. She looked younger in sleep, the worry lines on her face smoothed away. Jack hesitated, then entered the room. He pulled a blanket from the wardrobe and draped it gently over Grace. She stirred but did not wake. He stood looking down at her for a moment longer than necessary, then left, closing the door behind him. He ate his supper alone, then spent the evening on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge. The night was cool and clear, the kind of night that made a man feel small and large all at once. Small beneath the vast sky, large with the possibilities of the future. Grace slept through the night and into the next morning. Jack rose at dawn as always, saw to the animals, checked in with his foreman about the day's work. He returned to the house at 9 to find Grace in the kitchen, dressed in his mother's old calico dress. It was too large for her thin frame, but she had belted it with a length of rope to make it fit better. Her hair was down, hanging in waves past her shoulders. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you do not mind. I found coffee and made some." "I do not mind." Jack accepted the cup she poured for him, noting the way she moved carefully around the kitchen, still weak but determined. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." Grace poured her own coffee and sat at the table. "This house is so quiet. In Sacramento there was always noise. People shouting, wagons rattling past, the saloon music at all hours. It takes some getting used to the quiet. Some people find it unsettling. I find it peaceful." Grace wrapped her hands around her cup, savoring the warmth. "Jack, we should discuss the arrangements. Your letter said you needed help with the books and household matters. I am good with figures and I can cook and clean. I will work hard. You will not regret taking me in." "I have no doubts about that." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. In the morning light, he could see she was younger than he had realized, perhaps 23 or 24. Thomas had been 28 when he died. "But there is no rush. Take a few days to recover your strength. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden, Grace. You are family." The word seemed to catch her off guard. Her eyes widened, and for a moment Jack thought she might cry again. But she gathered herself, taking a sip of her coffee. "Did Thomas ever tell you how we met?" she asked. "He said it was at a church social." Grace smiled, and again Jack was struck by how it transformed her face. "I was serving lemonade. He came through the line 3 times, getting a glass each time even though he did not particularly like lemonade. The 3rd time, he admitted he was only there to talk to me. I appreciated his honesty." "That sounds like Thomas. He was never good at subtlety." "No, he was not." Grace's smile faded. "He was a good man, Jack, kind and patient and full of dreams. He talked about saving enough money to buy land to build a house to start a real life. He wanted children, a whole house full of them." "I am sorry you did not get that chance. So am I." Grace set down her cup. "But I am grateful for the time we had. Some people never find that kind of love even if they live to be 100. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, finishing their coffee. Finally, Jack stood. "Let me show you around the ranch properly, if you are feeling up to it." Grace rose, steadier on her feet than yesterday. "I would like that." They spent the morning walking the property. Jack showed Grace the barn where his best horses were stabled. He introduced her to the cattle in the near pasture, pointing out the different breeds and explaining his plans for expanding the herd. He took her to the creek that marked the southern boundary of his land, where cottonwoods grew thick, and the water ran clear and cold. Grace asked intelligent questions, showing genuine interest in the workings of the ranch. She had grown up on a farm in Missouri, she told him. Her father had raised pigs and chickens, sold eggs and bacon to the local markets. She knew about livestock and crops, about the endless cycle of work that defined rural life. "This is bigger than my father's farm," she said, gazing out at the rolling grassland. "Much bigger." 2,000 acres, Jack confirmed. "My father bought it for almost nothing back in '58. The previous owner got discouraged and sold out cheap. My father saw potential. It took him 10 years to make it profitable, but he did it." "Where are your parents now?" "Dead. My mother died of pneumonia when I was 18. My father followed her 2 years later. Just gave up, I think. He loved her so much he could not stand to be without her. Jack picked up a smooth stone from the creek bank, turning it over in his hand. Thomas and I ran the ranch together after that, until he got the wanderlust and went to California looking for gold. Did he find any? Some. Not enough to get rich, but enough to keep him interested. Then he met you, and suddenly gold did not matter as much. Jack skipped the stone across the water, watching it bounce 3 times before sinking. He was happy those last months. His letters were full of you and plans for the future. That is a good way to live, looking forward. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to be happy again. Not the way I was with Thomas, that is gone, but a different kind of happy. A quieter kind. Is that possible, do you think? I think it is. Jack looked at her, this woman who had traveled so far and endured so much. I think you can make a good life here if you want to, and I will help however I can. They walked back to the house together, not touching but close enough that their shadows merged on the ground. Jack felt something shifting in his chest, like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. He told himself it was just relief that Grace had finally arrived, that his long vigil was over. But some part of him knew it was more than that. The days fell into a rhythm. Grace rested and regained her strength. Jack continued running the ranch. They ate their meals together, talking easily about small things and occasionally about larger ones. Grace proved herself as capable as she had promised, taking over the household accounts and finding ways to economize that Jack had never considered. She cooked meals that were simple but delicious, a vast improvement over Jack's utilitarian fare. She mended his clothes and organized the house, and brought flowers in from the fields to brighten the rooms. The ranch hands adored her. She learned all their names within the first week and remembered details about their lives, asking after sick relatives or how a particular horse was healing. She baked cookies on Sundays and brought them out to the bunkhouse, sitting on the porch to listen to stories and laugh at jokes. Jack watched her come back to life like a flower after rain. Color returned to her cheeks. She gained weight, filling out the hollow places in her face and body. Her hair grew shinier, her step lighter. She smiled more often, and sometimes Jack even heard her singing as she worked. He tried not to notice how beautiful she was, tried not to watch for her appearance each morning, the way the sunlight caught in her hair. Tried not to linger over meals, drawing out conversations just to stay in her presence a few minutes longer. She was his brother's widow. She was under his protection. It would be wrong to feel anything for her beyond brotherly affection. But Jack had never been good at lying, even to himself. And the truth was that Grace Reynolds had captured his attention from the moment she stepped off that train. No, before that. From the moment he read her first letter with its careful words and quiet dignity. From the first day he went to the station to wait for her. Autumn deepened. The aspens in the high country turned gold, then bare. The cattle were brought down to the lower pastures for the winter. Jack spent long days on horseback, checking fences and preparing for the cold months ahead. Grace worked beside him when she could, riding one of the gentler horses, learning the boundaries of the ranch and the rhythms of the work. One evening in late October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Grace had brought out coffee and a blanket to ward off the chill. She sat in the rocking chair his mother had loved, the blanket draped over her lap. I have been here 6 weeks, she said. It feels longer than that, in a good way. Like you have always been here, Jack agreed. He was leaning against the porch railing, close enough to reach out and touch her if he dared. Jack, I need to tell you something. Grace set down her coffee cup. I have been doing the accounts as you asked. The ranch is doing well financially. Very well. You could afford to hire someone to manage the household. You do not need me here." Jack's stomach clenched. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "No, no, not at all." Grace looked up at him, her blue eyes earnest. "I love it here. I want to stay if you will have me. But I want to make sure that is what you want too. You have been so generous, and I do not want you to feel obligated to continue supporting me out of some sense of duty to Thomas." "Is that what you think this is? Duty?" "I do not know what else it could be." Jack pushed off from the railing and crouched before her chair, bringing himself to eye level with her. "Grace, I want you here. Not because of Thomas. Not out of duty. Because you belong here. Because this place is better with you in it. Because I am better with you in it." Grace's breath caught. "Jack, I know it has only been 6 weeks. I know you need time to heal from losing Thomas. I am not asking you for anything. I am just telling you that you have a home here for as long as you want it. Forever, if that is what you choose." "I choose it," Grace whispered. "I choose to stay." They stayed like that for a long moment, looking at each other in the fading light. Then Jack stood, offered his hand. Grace took it and rose, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "I am glad," Jack said simply. They went inside together, and Jack lay awake long into the night, thinking about the way Grace's hand had felt in his, small and warm and right. The first snow came in early November, dusting the peaks white. Jack woke to find Grace already in the kitchen, making breakfast. She had flour on her nose and looked so charming that Jack had to remind himself not to stare. "Flapjacks," she announced. "I found some preserved berries in the cellar. I hope you do not mind." "I do not mind." Jack washed his hands at the basin, then sat at the table. "You are up early." "I could not sleep. I was thinking." Grace flipped a flapjack expertly. "About the future, about what comes next." "What did you conclude?" "That I am tired of living in the past. Thomas is gone, and I will always love his memory, but he would not want me to stop living." Grace plated the flapjacks and brought them to the table, sitting across from Jack. "I want to be happy again. I want to look forward to things. And I want to figure out who I am now as Grace rather than as Thomas's wife or Thomas's widow." "That sounds wise. Does it?" "Sometimes I worry it is selfish. He has only been gone 8 months. Grief does not have a timeline, Grace. You love Thomas. You honor his memory, but you are still alive and you deserve to live." Jack took a bite of flapjack, savoring the sweetness of the berries. "These are delicious, by the way." Grace smiled. "I am glad you like them." They ate in comfortable silence. Afterward, Grace cleared the dishes while Jack prepared for the day's work. He was heading out to check on a section of fence that had been damaged in a windstorm. It would take most of the day, he warned her. "Be careful," Grace said. "The ground will be slippery with the snow." Her concern warmed him more than it should have. Jack touched his hat brim in acknowledgement and headed out. The work took longer than expected. By the time Jack returned, darkness had fallen and his hands were numb with cold despite his gloves. He put Rusty away and trudged to the house, looking forward to warmth and food and Grace's company. The house glowed with lamplight. Jack opened the door and stopped, taking in the scene. Grace had been baking. The kitchen table was covered with loaves of bread, several pies, and what looked like a cake. She stood at the stove stirring something that smelled incredible. "What is all this?" Grace jumped, turning to face him. "You are back. I was starting to worry. Are you all right?" "Just cold." "Grace, what is going on here?" She looked almost embarrassed. "I may have gotten carried away. I was thinking about Thanksgiving. It is next week, and I wanted to make sure we had plenty of food. Then I remembered the ranch hands, how they probably do not get proper holiday meals. So I thought we could invite them to the house for dinner. Unless you think that is inappropriate." Jack hung his coat on the peg by the door, buying himself a moment. The thought of a proper Thanksgiving, of the house full of people and food and celebration, made his chest ache in the best way. "I think it is a fine idea," he said. "The men would appreciate it." Grace beamed. "Good, because I have already told them they are coming at noon on Thursday." Jack laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "You already invited them. I knew you would say yes. You are not the kind of man who would let his workers go without on a holiday." Grace turned back to the stove. "Now go get cleaned up. Supper is almost ready." Thanksgiving arrived crisp and cold. The ranch hands showed up at the house scrubbed and in their best clothes, awkward but pleased. Grace had cooked enough food for an army. 2 turkeys, a ham, mountains of potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie, and the cake Jack had seen her making. They crowded around the table, the men joking and laughing. Grace moved among them, making sure everyone had enough, her face flushed and happy. Jack sat at the head of the table and felt something settle in his chest, a contentment he had not experienced since before his parents died. This was what a home should feel like, full and warm and alive. After dinner, the men returned to the bunkhouse, full and grateful. Jack and Grace cleaned up together, washing dishes and putting away leftovers. "Thank you," Jack said as Grace dried the last plate. "For today, it meant a lot to the men, it meant a lot to me. I should be thanking you. A year ago I was married and happy, sure of my future. 6 months ago I had nothing, now I have this." Grace gestured around the kitchen. "A home, friends, a purpose. You gave me that, Jack. You waited for me every single day, even when I am sure everyone told you I was never coming. That kind of faith is rare. You were worth waiting for." The words hung in the air between them. Grace set down the dish towel, turning to face him fully. They stood close in the small kitchen, closer than strictly proper. "Jack," she said softly, "I need to tell you something, all right? I think I am falling in love with you." Jack's heart stopped, then started again, beating hard enough that he was sure Grace could hear it. "You think?" "I know I am. I have been trying to convince myself it is too soon, that I should wait longer out of respect for Thomas. But the heart does not follow rules or timelines." Grace took a breath. "I understand if you do not feel the same way. You have been so kind to me and I do not want to presume, but I needed to tell you the truth." Jack reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hands, his rough palms against her soft cheeks. "I have been in love with you since the day you arrived," he said. "Maybe before that, maybe from the first letter. I did not wait at that station every day out of duty, Grace. I waited because I felt connected to you, to the idea of you. And when you finally stepped off that train, looking so tired and so brave, something in me knew. You were what I had been waiting for my whole life." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Really? Really?" Jack brushed his thumb across her cheekbone, catching a tear. "I love you, Grace Reynolds. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you sing when you think no one is listening. I love how you remember everyone's name and ask about their lives. I love that you took nothing and made a home out of it. I love you." "Kiss me," Grace whispered. Jack lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. Their lips met softly at first, a question and an answer. Then Grace's arms came around his neck and Jack pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. She tasted like cinnamon and hope in coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace rested her forehead against Jack's chest. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that I was imagining your feelings. Afraid that it was too soon, that people would think I did not love Thomas enough if I moved on so quickly. People will always talk. Let them." Jack pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thomas wanted you to be happy. He told me that in his last letter. He said that if anything ever happened to him, he hoped I would look after you. I do not think he meant like this exactly, but I believe he would understand. He would." Grace pulled back to look up at Jack. "He used to say you were the best man he knew." He was right. They stood holding each other in the quiet kitchen, the lamps burning low, the night deep around them. Jack felt as though he had waited his whole life for this moment, not just the 6 months at the station, but all the years before that. Every choice he had made, every path he had taken had led him here, to this woman, to this feeling. "Will you marry me?" The words were out before Jack could second-guess them. Grace's eyes widened. "Jack, are you sure? We have only just admitted our feelings." "I have never been more sure of anything. I know it is fast. We can have a long engagement if you want, do this properly. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I want to marry you, Grace. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you." Jack took her hands in his. "Say yes, please." Grace looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face. Then she smiled, radiant and sure. "Yes. Yes, Jack Vernon, I will marry you." Jack picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Grace laughed too, clinging to his shoulders. When he set her down, she pulled him into another kiss, this one fierce and claiming. They were married 3 weeks later, just before Christmas. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Eldorado Canyon with the ranch hands and a few townsfolk as witnesses. Grace wore a new dress Jack had bought for her, deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Jack wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back, his heart racing. Bill Cooper, the station master, attended the wedding. Afterward, he shook Jack's hand and said, "I knew she would come. All those months I never doubted. Some things are meant to be." The winter was long and cold, but Jack and Grace barely noticed. They were lost in each other, learning the rhythms of married life. Grace moved her things into Jack's bedroom, and they fell asleep each night tangled together, warm beneath layers of quilts. Jack discovered that Grace talked in her sleep, nonsensical phrases that made him smile. Grace learned that Jack was always cold when he first woke up, and she took to warming his shirts by the fire before he dressed. They had their first argument over how to organize the pantry and made up within an hour, unable to stay mad at each other. They cooked together and worked together and dreamed together. In the spring, Grace told Jack she was expecting a child. He kissed her until they were both breathless, his hand on her still flat belly, marveling at the life they had created. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "Not even a little bit." Their son was born in October, during the harvest. Grace labored for 12 hours while Jack wore a path in the porch boards, pacing and praying. When the midwife finally called him inside, Jack found Grace exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. "Meet your son," she said. Jack took the baby carefully, awed by how small and perfect he was. The baby had Grace's eyes and Jack's dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead, judging by his wails. "What should we name him?" Jack asked. "I was thinking Thomas, for your brother." Jack's throat tightened. "Are you sure? Thomas brought us together in a way. He loved us both. It seems right to honor him." Grace stroked the baby's cheek with one finger. "Thomas Vernon. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect." They called him Tommy to distinguish him from his uncle. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. He had his mother's temperament, sunny and sweet, but his father's stubborn determination. The ranch prospered. Jack expanded the herd, bought adjoining land when it came available. Grace kept the books and managed the household and raised Tommy, somehow making it all look effortless. On Sundays, they went to church in town. A family, accepted and respected. People had talked, of course, when Jack and Grace married so quickly. But the talk died down as time passed, and it became clear that theirs was a true love match, not some arrangement of convenience. They could not hide the way they looked at each other, the casual touches, the private smiles that said more than words ever could. On the first anniversary of Grace's arrival in Eldorado Canyon, Jack took her back to the train station. Tommy was with the neighbor woman for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. "Why are we here?" Grace asked as Jack helped her down from the wagon. "I wanted to show you something." Jack led her to the bench where he had sat for 6 months. "This is where I waited. Every single day I sat right here and watched for you." Grace looked at the bench, then at the tracks stretching away into the distance. "What did you think about all those hours?" "At first I thought about Thomas, about how much he loved you, how he would want me to keep my word. But as time went on, I thought more about you. I wondered what you looked like, what your voice sounded like. I imagined conversations we might have. I pictured you here in Nevada making a life with me." Jack took her hand. "And then you finally arrived, and you were so much more than I had imagined, braver and stronger and more beautiful. You were worth every moment of waiting." "I used to feel guilty," Grace admitted, "about loving you. I thought it meant I had not loved Thomas enough. But I realize now that love is not finite. I can love Thomas's memory and love you both fully. One does not diminish the other. Thomas would be happy for us. For you especially, you deserve all the joy in the world." They stood on the platform as a train pulled in, passengers disembarking. Jack watched them and remembered the day Grace had stepped off the train, pale and exhausted but determined. He remembered the way his heart had recognized her before his mind caught up. He remembered thinking that some waits were worth it, that some things were meant to be. "I love you," Grace said, leaning against his side. "I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond that. And I love you." Jack wrapped his arm around her. "Thank you for being worth the wait. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life." "I would choose you in every lifetime," Grace said, "in every version of this story." They drove home together as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Tommy was waiting for them, laughing in the neighbor woman's arms. Jack scooped him up and Grace leaned against his side, and they stood in front of their house, their home, their life. The years passed in the way years do, a blur of seasons and moments. Grace had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son. The ranch grew, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Tommy grew tall and strong, a natural horseman like his father. The girls were smart and fearless, taking after their mother. Jack never missed a day telling Grace he loved her. They grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives. But the way Jack looked at Grace never changed. She was still the woman he had waited for, the one who had made his life complete. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Half the county showed up, crowding into the ranch house and spilling out onto the porch. There was music and dancing and more food than any gathering needed. Late in the evening, Jack found Grace on the porch, looking out at the land they had built together. "Happy anniversary," he said, handing her a glass of punch. 25 years. Where did the time go?" Grace took the glass, smiling. "We have a good life, Jack Vernon. The best life." Jack clinked his glass against hers. "And it all started because I was stubborn enough to wait for a woman who was 6 months late. I still cannot believe you waited every single day, 184 days. I would have waited longer if needed, forever probably." Jack set down his glass and pulled Grace into his arms, swaying to the music drifting from inside. "You were worth it. You are worth everything." They danced on the porch in the moonlight, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created. Inside, their children laughed. In the bunkhouse, the ranch hands were sharing stories. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. The creek babbled over its stones. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging. Grace rested her head on Jack's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was what she had dreamed of during those hard months in Sacramento, scrubbing clothes until her hands bled, saving every penny, surviving illness and hardship. This feeling of safety and love and belonging. "I am so glad I came," she whispered. "Even 6 months late." "I am glad I waited," Jack replied. "Every single day." They stayed on the porch long after the party ended, long after their guests had gone home and their children had gone to bed. They stood together in the Nevada night, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from loss and patience and faith. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on the same porch in matching rocking chairs, their grandchildren playing in the yard, Grace would sometimes turn to Jack and ask, "Would you really have waited forever?" And Jack would always answer, "Forever and a day. For you, I would have waited until the end of time." It was the truth. Some loves were worth waiting for. Some people were worth every moment of uncertainty, every day of hope deferred. Grace had been 6 months late, but she had arrived exactly when she was meant to. And Jack had been there, faithful and constant, waiting at that station because his heart knew what his head did not. That Grace Reynolds was his destiny, his future, his reason for everything. They lived long lives, Jack and Grace. They saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They weathered droughts and hard winters, economic panics and personal sorrows. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Jack died at 82, Grace was holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying." Grace lived 3 more years, surrounded by family, her mind sharp until the very end. On her last day, her oldest son Tommy sat with her. She looked up at him with eyes still as blue as a Nevada sky and said, "Tell me the story again, about how your father waited." Tommy told her, as he had told his children and would someday tell his grandchildren. About the cowboy who went to the train station every single day for 6 months, waiting for a woman who was late. About faith and patience and love that refused to give up. About two people who found each other against all odds and built a life that became a legend. When the story was finished, Grace smiled. "He waited," she said softly. "He really waited. He did, Mama, every single day. And I finally came. You did. And you made him happier than he ever dreamed possible." Grace closed her eyes, still smiling, and slipped away peacefully. They buried her next to Jack on a hill overlooking the ranch with a headstone that read, "Grace Reynolds Vernon. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She was worth the wait." The ranch remained in the family for generations. The house stood strong, weathering storms and seasons. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear the sound of laughter on the porch and see two figures dancing in the moonlight. Forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the day when a woman arrived 6 months late, and the cowboy who had waited every single day was finally rewarded for his faith. The story became part of Eldorado Canyon lore, told and retold, embellished and remembered. Parents told it to their children as an example of true devotion. Young couples invoked Jack and Grace's names on their wedding days, hoping for a love as enduring. The bench at the train station, where Jack had sat through sun and wind and doubt, became a landmark. People would point it out to visitors, sharing the tale of the man who waited and the woman who was worth waiting for. But the real legacy of Jack and Grace Vernon was not in the stories people told or the ranch they built. It was in the love they had shown was possible, the proof that patience and faith could be rewarded. The evidence that sometimes the things worth having were the things you had to wait for, to work for, to believe in even when all logic said to give up. They had lived well and loved completely. They had raised children who knew what true partnership looked like. They had built something lasting, not just in land and cattle, but in the example they set for everyone who knew them. And it all began on that platform, with a cowboy who refused to stop believing, and a woman who fought her way across half a country to reach him. She arrived 6 months late, but she arrived. And he had waited every single day because some things, some people are worth waiting for. That was the real story. Not just of waiting, but of choosing to wait, of having faith when faith seemed foolish, of love that began as duty and grew into something that would echo through generations, of two broken people who found each other and made each other whole. In the end, it was a love story. The kind people dream about and write songs about and hope to find for themselves. The kind that proves that timing is not everything. That late can still be right on time. That waiting can be its own kind of journey, and arrival can be all the sweeter for the patience that preceded it. Jack and Grace. The cowboy and the widow. The man who waited and the woman who came. Their story lived on, a testament to the power of keeping faith, honoring commitments, and believing in love even when love seemed impossible. And somewhere, perhaps, they were still dancing on that porch, still young and in love, still grateful for every day they had together. Still proof that the best things in life are worth waiting for, that true love exists, and that sometimes, when you wait long enough with an open heart, what arrives is more than you ever dreamed possible. The end of their mortal story was just the beginning of their legend, passed down through generations, inspiring countless others to hold on a little longer, to believe a little harder, to wait with faith and hope and love for the person who would make it all worthwhile. She arrived 6 months late. He had waited every single day at that station, and when she finally stepped off that train, tired and uncertain and brave, he was there, just as he said he would be, just as she had hoped. And from that moment on, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together,